All right. We're queuing it up. We're actually live right now. Our audio is coming across.
Okay. Hey, everybody.
Oscar, we need a soundtrack to go with this.
No.
A game
Yeah,
development soundtrack.
I'll reach out to Megan McDuffie, see if she's got anything laying around.
We're getting there's people literally watching us right now. This is going to be part of the legend that is this episode. 14 people jumped in almost instantaneously. Thank you for coming. In 10 seconds, we're going to officially begin.
Here we go.
All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the Game Development live stream. I am Jon Radoff. I am co-hosting this along with my co-host, Paul. And today we have an awesome guest, Raph Koster, legend in MMO game development, going back to Ultima Online, Star Wars Galaxy, and now his new game, Stars Reach. So we're going to talk about the whole history of MMORPGs, the future of MMOs, and everything in between. And we may even talk about Raph's book on game design. This is a perfect episode if you are a game developer, if you're doing anything massively multiplayer. This is the episode you cannot miss. Raph, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Raph. So let's start with what's current. What are you working on?
So I run a studio called Playable Worlds, and we are currently building a game called Stars Reach. Stars Reach is a science fantasy MMO that is really pushing the boundaries of what an MMO can be. It's an endless galaxy of procedurally generated planets, all of which are simulated to the degree that you can reroute rivers. The forests can burn down. The creatures have ecologies. It is simulation that has never been done in the game industry at all, ever before. And we are letting players loose in this galaxy to pretty much wreak havoc, discover alien worlds, extract resources, build homes, build space stations, mine asteroids, set up player cities, and govern their own planets and build galactic empires together. So it is it's a big project. We've been working on it for 5 years already. We're about a year from launch, and we are going to Kickstarter on Tuesday. It's, as you probably all know and all your viewers know, an interesting time in the game industry. And funding is hard to come by. So we are going to Kickstarter not to raise all the money to finish the game, but actually to demonstrate to investors that there is market demand for this, because we know there is market demand for this. So we're taking it to Kickstarter, giving people the chance to basically buy in early for early access and that kind of thing now.
Let's talk a little bit about the new things that you're bringing into this game. So when you talk about the simulation engine behind this and doing things that have never been done in a game before, I think when we've talked about it in the past, you've talked about it as even chemistry simulation happening within this. Right. Can you just elaborate on the simulation piece? I think I'm interested, and everybody will be interested in a couple of aspects of this. First, just sort of the technical part of that is just fun. I'm curious, what is that simulation system? But then the broader question of just what fun does that add to the experience? I mean, we're talking to the man who developed the theory of fun, literally. So let's dive into what is the fun factor that brings to the table that people will not have experienced in any other game before?
Sure. So this is a GameDev live stream. So I'll focus it on kind of the game design aspect of it for a bit. Mm-hmm. If we get all theoretical, right? The heart of a game is actually a toy that is somewhere inside of it, right? And it becomes a game when you start putting goals on it. But before that, it's got to be a fun toy, right? Like in Mario, jumping around is one of the core toys, and it just feels good. And you start immediately giving yourself challenges with it. Just like, I wonder if I could pull this off, right? And then what a game does is it starts structuring the challenges and laying them out for you, right? So what we did with this simulation is make the environment into a toy, right? Like, we've made it into something that moment to moment, it does things you expect. And what I mean by that, the whole environment, all of it, is modeled as what we call cellular automata. So if you know Conway's Game of Life, the thing with the little gliders, okay, we're doing that, only instead with just black dots and white dots, we're doing it with several hundred different colored dots, all of which have different rules. Each one has different rules. And we're doing it in 3D. So every cubic meter of every planet and every space zone has in it little tiny agents, and those agents know what they are made of. I'm water. No, I am steel or whatever, which means that they know how they react differently to temperature. I boil at this temperature and I turn into vapor and float. And no, I turn solid when I reach this temperature, and now you can walk on me, but I'm slippery. Whereas the steel goes, those temperature changes really don't matter to me. I'm not going to do anything. So we model the state of matter for every type of resource in the game. We know whether they respect gravity. We know how well they hold hands with the agents next to them. So we support varying adhesion rates so that, stone can form arches. But if you try to build an arch out of sand, it's going to fall and slump and flow. And water, of course, flows and gets in everywhere. We support chemical reactions between the agents. So when the water meets the stone or meets the dirt, it can erode away at the stone and it can turn the dirt into mud, which then affects player locomotion. When you try walking on it, you get stuck in the mud. Okay, so it's kind of magical. Okay, because
sounds like it.
yeah, in a regular game, all of this stuff is cardboard sets, right? It's we build a static mesh, and making it changeable is actually very expensive. If we design it to break, it has to break in predictable ways by and large, right? So what we've done is make all of the terrain and the atmosphere is actually built out of this simulation. And then we can layer things on top of it, like let's move the temperature up and down with the seasons, or even with day and night, so that puddles freeze overnight and then thaw in the morning. Then we give players the tools to play with it. You can do all the things you can do in Minecraft. You can dig tunnels, for example. But if you dig under a sand dune, it's going to collapse and suffocate you. We let players heat and freeze the environment. We let them harvest materials from the environment. Every tree that you'll see, I think we've got a trailer we can show at some point here. Every tree that you see would actually be a monster in other MMOs. Like, every tree you see actually landed there as a seedling. It grows through stages of maturity. It throws off seedlings. It can die. It can burn down. Forests can spread. They pay attention to their local climate. They thrive based on how the environment's doing. So all of this unlocks a load of fun for players. We don't have just farming. We have farming with a dozen types of soil with varying pH, and players need to manage what crops grow in what climates, and they can set up heaters and chillers in order to grow crops or trees in different environments. Miners have to worry about if you're mining uranium, it might release radon gas that is radioactive and poisonous, but is also a valuable resource in its own right. And you might need to watch out, because if you find a pocket of methane and start firing your blaster, it might catch fire and burn you to death, right? Like, all of these kinds of things just add depth everywhere. You're fighting alien creatures. They start lobbing these heat blaster bolt things at you, and they land on the ground and they cause lava craters that you can fall into that then gradually cool. And if you start shooting back, you might collapse the cliff behind them and crush them to death.
So you sold me on the complexity of the sandbox, man. This sounds great. It's very Yo Dog. I heard you like simulation, so I put simulation in your simulation. But so what about the other side of it? So you've created the perfect sandbox. Where does the game come in? How do you keep this sort of such a complex system from just devolving to a divergent state that's just not fun for anybody, right? How do you keep it on rails?
Yeah, that's actually one of the biggest design challenges. So first, we procedurally generate all the planets and space zones. So they are designed to be disposable, unlike design in other MMOs, where once you build a zone, it's a massive investment. For us, it's actually fairly cheap. So we proc gen these planets. Each one of them is a zone. They exist in a galactic network. We don't do a single like seamless map, right? Instead, we embrace the fact that these are separate zones that you hyperlink. That allows us to add planets, remove planets when they're used up. They launch, they shut down. The galaxy is always changing. You find amazing, like this planet's basically a solid diamond crystal. Great. You're going to mine it all. The planet will be destroyed. And then nobody will go there anymore. And then the wormhole to it collapses and we lose it. So it creates this ever-shifting economy. But of course, if you move in on a planet, start building your homes, building your cities, you don't want it to be a pockmarked ruin, right? So we give players the ability to tend the planet as well. Our lore is all about the fact that this is a terraformed arm of the galaxy. Humans have ruined their homeworlds. They've been allowed out by the robot servitors who are still tending the garden of their long lost masters, the old ones that made us all, okay? And the robot servitors are like, you're not really allowed to completely wreck these. So every planet has a health bar. Players have to worry about keeping the planet alive. If not, the servitors may invade and punish them. They can reforest the planet. They can try to remediate the damage. And when they govern a planet, they can also say, hey, strangers, you're not allowed to do things here. You're not allowed to carve holes in the ground anymore because we don't trust you. Only those of us who live here are allowed to do things. But we are handing them a tough problem, right? And one of our hopes is that players learn to think about all the different ways to play, all the ways in which we interact with our environments, the fact that we share resources in common, and learn how to negotiate. How do we do that? And bring some of those lessons back into the real world. That's like our secret thematic hope. So
I have a question.
Metaphor.
I have a question I want you to think about a little bit while I give a quick station identification and invite some folks in here to participate in the conversation as well. And Oscar, let's get ready to queue up the trailer as well, just so we can share that with people so that they can see it if they haven't had a chance to already. But Raph, one of the things, as you described, the complexity of this system is how emergent these properties must be. I'm really curious, like, what is the most surprising thing to you that you've seen just out of the early stage play? Just super curious about that. But let me also say this conversation, if you've been watching any of these live streams before, you know that this isn't just me and Paul and Oscar talking to Raph today. This is actually about you participating in it. So the easiest way you can do that is just post a comment. We bring those live on the channel and we'll use them to drive the conversation. So please add those comments to wherever you are, whether it's YouTube, LinkedIn, X, Facebook, Twitch, we're streaming on now as well. We're everywhere. But you can also join the channel. So if you'd like to do that, let us know that you'd love to pop in and have a conversation with Raph here. Why wouldn't you do that? We're here with the man himself. Like, you are missing an opportunity if you don't do that. All you need is a video camera and we can have you on. Oscar will send you the StreamYard link and we'll bring you right into the channel. So why not take part in a little industry gathering that just happens to be streamed right now? Kind of pre-GDC, like what we do in the hallways in the conversation, except everyone gets to watch it. Like, that's literally what we're trying to capture in this. So Oscar, while Raph is continuing to think about that emergence question, do we have a trailer that we can show here?
Absolutely. One moment. Beep, bop, boop.
Work today is.
Oh, stop.
Awesome.
Raph, how about that emergence question?
Yeah, I've got a couple actually.
Yeah.
So one of the ones that I think everybody always loves playing with the water. Many of the planets have cave systems underground. So pretty common that people drill straight down and drain a lake into the underground cave systems. Many of those planets also, the further down you go, the hotter it gets. So eventually that water hits lava. So the first time we saw a naturally occurring geyser caught us by surprise. So, drilling straight down, the water poured down, it hit the lava, it's superheated, it rose as steam all the way up into the stratosphere of the planet. It got so high up in altitude that it froze. It fell as a cap of ice, landed down in the geyser, capped it, no more steam, slowly melted, rinse, repeat. And we didn't code that. Like, it just happened. So that was a pretty cool moment. But the second one, which I think speaks more to the game that we layered on top of this world, is it took very little time once we had enough testers in the game and unlocked the player building system for a player named Beanstalk Head. Hi, Beanstalk, if you're listening. To organize people, say, we should move in on the tropical planet of Gaiamar. We should grid out roads, all put our houses near one another, and found a city. And we had not yet added the city functionality. We had the player houses, but we had not yet unrolled. We still haven't unrolled city government. But Beanstalk became the unofficial mayor. People started donating their housing plots to build town halls and town squares and fountains and gazebos and plazas. We do have road paving in there. And pretty soon there was a city of dozens of people with roads and public art and private homes. And they worked on it for a few weeks, knowing that it was all going to get wiped when we put in the next update, right? That kind of emergent collaboration is, I think, the magic of MMOs, right?
Yeah.
And being able to do it in a way where you really can shape the environment and it's not just instance houses sitting in a pocket dimension or a pre-built house that you can only decorate on the inside, really, really unlocks that creativity, right? We basically stacked a full sandbox. Think Star Wars Galaxies, RuneScape, ArcAge, Eve, that kind of gameplay with skill trees and professions and everything on top of this simulation. And that means that eventually Beanstalk Head will actually be able to progress in the politician skill track and learn political skills as part of an RPG and get the powers to do things like zoning and the like. But it was awesome to see the players basically anticipate that and start doing it even without the official support.
That's awesome. I like how you're hinting at, sort of the codification, having these sort of emergent behaviors end up as codified rule sets, like how do you decide when to take a system like zoning or something that's pretty abstract and codify that into a rule set?
Basically, we look at first, what are the ways to play? What are ways that people enjoy playing? And we actually started this by doing a lot of market research and building vision pillars around particular play motivations, right? If you saw the trailer, you noticed that actually the vibe of the game, it doesn't much look like a super hardcore, complex, intricate thing with a ton of buttons on the HUD and whatnot. We very intentionally were deeply inspired, by the way, by Breath of the Wild, which crammed all of that complexity into a game with no HUD, right? That was a huge inspiration to me for this. And so oh, look, there's that question. The design of this predates Tears of the Kingdom. We started working on this. I started working on the design in 2018, and we built the team in 2019 when we first started. There's some audio going there. So how do we decide? We look at the different ways to play, the different motivations, and we say, we want to reward each of these play styles within the game in ways where you don't feel left behind or unacknowledged. Like a classic example is if you're a role player in an MMO, that mostly means you're going to get out-leveled by your friends and not be able to play with them anymore, right? Because the game doesn't have any way to recognize role play. It doesn't have any way to give you the pats on the head. There's no feedback loop for that. That's part of why in Galaxies we added dancing and those other methods, right? So we go through all the ways to play in an MMO, and we go, can we build a reward loop for them? And being a leader is one of the classic ways to play an MMO. So we built a leadership track, and that led to essentially politician is a form of guild leader track, right? So we look at it that way. And then the second step is to go, each of these needs to be fun to play in its own right. And if we can't make it fun, we cut it, right? But it also needs to output something of economic value that other types of players need, whether that's a good or a service. Everything needs to be something that other players need around so that the combatants come to appreciate the existence of the role players, because there's something those role players have that the combatants need. So ultimately what ties it together is a player-driven economy where everything is of value to other people.
Hey, we got a question from the community here. Star Wars Galaxies player, Raph, after all these years. I think there's still SWG servers up and running that people are playing on. I'm curious if Animized is one of those. And sorry for the music. Funny story, Civ 7 really sucks battery, and I had to go to the other window and close it, and it launched the music at me. So apologies for that. But my battery was down to 3%.
Now we know what you would do in between asking questions. You place
and no, if I was doing that, I would not be able to pay attention to anything else because it would be far too addictive. But we definitely shut it down. So yeah, what do you think of the question here regarding just sort of, I guess it's really a question about the scope of the player-owned aspects of everything from governance to shops and things like that?
Yeah. This is a great example of kind of a scoping question, right? Because part of the reason why we went with this sort of segmented map is because having each zone separate gives us really bright lines for doing things like governmental rules. If a group claims a planet, they can do things like flip it to PvP set or on or off. It's up to them to decide what they want their planet to be like, right? That, as anybody who's played games with PvP zoning knows, the brighter the line that you step across, the better, right? Because the boundary conditions there are where dupe bugs and murder problems and customer support calls and all the rest come from. So by breaking things up by zone actually makes for a cleaner experience for the player, because we can signpost on the outside of the zone, hey, if you go in there, this is what the rules are like in there. Right. So one way to think of that architecturally is like hyperlinking all the Minecraft servers together or hyperlinking all the Roblox games together. And if you are thinking in the back of your head, you metaversey types, wait, does that mean this architecture is, the answer to that is yes, it is that kind of an architecture. So the direct answer is, first cut will probably do planet level government. That doesn't mean that people can't set up separated cities, but at the first cut, we're probably going to only have one government that runs the planet because it's clean lines. Now, we will have, like any guild system does, kind of delegation of powers. So you would be able to say, hey, I'm going to say that person's the mayor, this person's a different mayor, they both have zoning powers, because whoever runs the planet can delegate powers, just like in a guild.
So, Raph, I was also a player of Star Wars Galaxies back in the day, and was involved in like running a player-run city and stuff. It was one of the first games that I ever played that really had that level of kind of player governance in it. Another one that came to mind is like Shadowbane, which I played around with back in the day. But I'm curious, what did you learn most about governance systems from the experience with Star Wars Galaxies, and then has anyone really taken that further over the course of the last couple of decades? I guess you are in this, but what happened in between? And what are the missed opportunities here around that from a player fun standpoint?
Yeah, we actually have to go all the way back to UO, because the impetus for it was in UO, we had the design built cities and they had safe zones around them. And then players had housing all over the map. And then some players started getting together and founding their own cities, but they didn't have the ability to create safe zones or get guards or anything like that. And we always talked about creating what we called a town stone, because guilds were run with guild stones, right, that you put in someone's house and gave you the control panel. A town stone would have done the same thing, but defined the area for a town. And we just never got to do it, right? And so when we were doing Galaxies, that became one of the key things. Let's bring back the townstone idea. And we did. And we had a politician track. Player cities in Galaxies were really popular. A lot of people participated in them. People did a huge amount of different things. Museums and bazaars and, of course, homes and home decorating and all of that. The tricky thing with it, of course, is you need real estate. And, the question of virtual real estate is an intricate design topic. I highly recommend reading some of the articles that Lars Doucette has put up about Georgism and land tax and all of those kinds of things. Because when you build static map worlds, you have very limited real estate. And that pushes you, since you reserve almost all of it for adventuring, you can't let it get consumed by housing. So that pushes you as a developer to instead do instanced housing. And instanced housing is wonderful in that you can horizontally scale as much as you want. Everybody gets a house, but you don't then get the social dynamics that emerge from actually having a city with public places in it. So it's a huge trade-off, right? So you have to design your game to have truly large amounts of real estate in order to accommodate non-instanced housing. And I think that's the main barrier, right? When we think about designing MMOs, creating all of the zones by hand is one of the largest expenses, right? From a development point of view. So the procedurality of our game is actually sort of the way to cut this particular Gordian knot. It allows us to have basically the exact correct amount of real estate needed for the current player base, because we can expand it and shrink it to fit whatever the population is. And that means we can think, instead of, we need this many, square kilometers for this kind of player density. And then we can start thinking about our social design in terms of Dunbar's number, village-sized communities where people come to know one another. We know those retain better, so it helps our business model, right? Like it starts clicking into place in a whole bunch of different ways, right? Hopefully that it's a hard problem, and you need to have particular solutions to be able to kind of move the state of the art forward, I think.
Raph, let's talk about one of the business questions around Kickstarter in particular. And I'm not really asking you to defend the Kickstarter initiative on Stars Reach per se, but what do you think of Kickstarter as a platform? I mean, I think it is true that a lot of games have, not succeeded there, and a lot of people have sort of soured on it as a platform. how you feel about that as a platform today, and I guess for the game development audience, what's your advice to anybody considering that as a platform?
Yeah. So straight up, no bullshit talk. Players have been burned so badly by Kickstarters.
Totally.
And one of the biggest reasons is that game development is, by and large, deeply unpredictable, right?
Mhm.
The number one thing that you should be very wary of in any video game Kickstarter is people who are showing you an idea and they don't have a game yet, right? Because that means they're still in the deeply unpredictable phase, right? This is a big part of what's happened, particularly with larger projects. They go out there with unrealistic asks, and they're very early in development. Their budgets are badly misestimated. They need much more money than the Kickstarter is going to ask for or could possibly reach. Particularly MMOs, which are efforts that take, potentially tens of millions of dollars. And yeah, people are going to get burned if they back something that is that early on and is not yet in a place where they can demonstrate what they're doing, right? On the other hand, and this is where I have to put on sort of the industry observer hat for a minute. If the sources of funding in the video game industry won't or don't back the things that players want, players are going to have to back them themselves because it's the only other source of money, right? Right now, we're in a place where publishers are deeply conservative. They're shutting down studios left and right after significant investments. Sometimes after just funding them last year, they're yanking the studio now, right? Before anything has even really gotten done. A lot of the venture capital infrastructure has dried up. I'm sure all of our industry folks have probably seen the Matthew Ball giant mega deck of doom, right? And I say of doom advisedly, right? Like it paints a somewhat ugly picture. So in our case, what are we trying to do? First, we are 5 years into a 6-year development. Okay, so we are literally a couple of months, a few months from alpha. So the game has been playable and we've been letting players play it for 6 months now.
Mhm.
People are in. We lifted the NDA months ago because we have high confidence in what we're making. Our satisfaction rating from pre-alpha testers is over 80% with what we have right now, right? And thanks to our architecture, we're able to deliver content and features really rapidly. Like we drop whole features every 2 or 3 weeks because it's all done using very metaversy code, soft coded the cloud, stream assets down on the fly kinds of ways, right? So we're able to make really fast progress. So, and then the last thing is we aren't asking for all the money to finish the game. We are basically our offerings that we are going to be walking through in more detail on our announcement live stream. We're going to do a fireside on Saturday. But basically what we're going to say is, hey, if you buy in now, you're going to get to you can test, obviously, you can come in and you'll get to play for this one-time purchase through all of early access, right? So you'll be getting something now. It won't be a finished game, but you'll be getting something now, right? Can I promise that that means that we will get all the way to the end, right? Well, we are hoping to use this Kickstarter as evidence to the larger market that we are worthy of existing. So at minimum, you will get to play it now. And if you demonstrate to the world we are worthy of existing, we'll be able to continue fundraising. And then you'll be able to play it when it launches fully complete. But you'll be able to play it now, I think is the core thing, right? I wish the industry were in a place where I could say something more reassuring than that, but it's not, candidly, right? And I think those of us who are in the industry know what it's like right now. We firmly believe that this game should exist, and that MMOs need a swift kick and to move forward and to reinvent themselves, because it feels like they've been a bit stale for a while. And so we desperately want this to exist, and we're all out here doing our best in order to make that happen. If players want to come along on the journey, we appreciate it. And if they don't, believe me, I get it. I was burned by those Kickstarters too.
Well, I like how you're using Kickstarter as sort of a validator and a force. You've got every person that contributes or participates is really, it's one of these situations where their efforts are multiplied many times over by the design of what you put in, because they're not being asked to carry the heavy weight, right? They're basically being asked to validate. I think I'm not aware of anybody else doing that sort of philosophy at this scale. So I don't know. Kudos to you. I hope you win with this strategy. It's a really compelling strategy.
Yeah. One thing I'll mention, this is not, as you saw, a small project. We've actually raised nearly $40 million to date, right? So you will see that when we set a Kickstarter goal, it is not going to be for millions and millions of dollars.
Exactly. But a wild success on Kickstarter will I'm sure will seriously grease the wheels for your ability to do the heavy lift, right?
Sure, we don't need it to be a wild success, I think is a key thing, right?
Yeah, precisely.
Raph, we've mentioned the metaverse word at least twice on this stream so far. We have a comment from William Volk here in the studio audience comparing what you're doing to the metaverse as well. I have a channel called Building the Metaverse, so it's
I've been on it.
Yes, indeed. And so a subject near and dear to me. I have just some really practical curiosity around how you think about scoping a game like this, because when you talk about making a simulation engine of this complexity, it can become anything. And there was about a zillion quote unquote metaverse projects over the last 4 years that promise to simulate everything basically, and essentially be snow crash in your VR headset. So how did you think about that? What was the journey around that? I think for people that are thinking about building games, getting the scoping of your game right is one of the most important things, because you can get carried away there. And it's also relevant to the Kickstarter question too, when you talk about people going through the initial random walk of finding the fun in a concept. That's where a lot of Kickstarters have gone wrong. I think there have been Kickstarters on building metaverses as well that didn't go anywhere. So I'll just kind of leave that with you.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so first, it's hard not to answer this without tooting my own horn a little bit, right? But
okay.
I think it's important, I would not advise somebody do this as their first online project. I would not advise somebody do an online game of any scale as their first project at all, right? And we do see that, right? We do see it's sort of a running joke in GameDev forums and Reddits and whatever. Hi, this is my first game and I'm going to make an MMO. Run away, right? An MMO is it's climbing Mount Everest, right? It's one of the largest, most challenging things that you can do in all of video game development. So that's the first thing. There just aren't that many people on the planet who have been building online worlds continuously for decades. It's a relatively small subspecialty, right? There just aren't that many folks who've done it. Some of them have been doing it continuously since the 80s, right? And that means they've built text-based worlds and text-based engines. Then they did 2D-based ones using client architectures. And then they went on and they did web-based ones using Flash clients. And then they did 3D ones using, right? And so on, right? I've actually worked on teams that have built engines in each of those generations. This is not my first MMO from scratch. It's not even my first MMO engine from scratch, right? And I think the lessons that you get from doing that are really, really important and valuable, right? There's some things that it doesn't matter how many times you get told. It's not the same as having the experience and trying things and, working through the problems and then dealing with the consequences during live operations, right? Because the challenges that we faced with text-based MUDs versus the challenges we faced with 2D isometric UO versus the challenges we faced with Flash clients when I was doing MetaPlays, radically different from one another. 3D engines with Galaxies and now Stars Reach, right? All kinds of different complexities arise. Cloud technologies. My last startup when I did MetaPlace was a competitor to Roblox. It was a metaverse. At peak, there were 70,000 worlds running on this web-based metaverse system, right? We went through the 2008 crash, couldn't make enough money, pivoted, made Facebook games with it. A couple of them were pretty big hits. We sold the company to Playdom and Disney, and that metaverse tech became the back end for Club Penguin, of all things, right? So many lessons that you end up learning along the way. So you can't make, it's hard to make a small scope MMO like that's there, but you can try to make smart choices, right? The biggest thing that dooms MMO projects is the content load, right? Mm-hmm. And the more you embrace static content, which is the classic way of building MMOs, the more you're setting yourself up directly in the red ocean of competition with the people with bottomless pockets against their incredibly high polish standards and content standards, right? It's a classic blue ocean, red ocean problem. If you're going to design a virtual world of some sort, you better do something that the established competitors aren't doing. You better go at it at 90 degrees. And
I wonder what the aggregate R&D investment into content in World of Warcraft is at this point.
At this point, it's got to be, I mean, hundreds of millions, probably billions, right? It's got to be, right?
A big number is a really big, bigger, much bigger than the budget for your game that you're working on right now.
Yes. By far.
And anybody who exists.
Yeah. Here's an example. Like budgets in games go up about 10x every decade, right? And that's driven by a number of factors. But if you even think about what Blizzard did to the MMO space at the time, what they did was spend everybody else into the dirt, right? When World of Warcraft came out, it came out with a budget that was somewhere between 3 and 5 times larger than every other MMO on the market at that time. Mm-hmm. In fact, it may have gotten a budget by itself as large as all the MMOs on the market at that time by itself, Jesus. Right? And that was a huge factor in its success. They could achieve a level of polish and content that nobody else could afford to do, right? We've seen that pattern, right? Where a big incumbent can outspend everybody. If you try competing directly head to head against that, you're going to lose, right? It doesn't matter how great you are. I mean, some companies, we saw this during the Facebook years with Zynga, they'll take that war chest and they'll just, they could buy all the ads and starve your game of visibility, for example, right? So it's very hard to go up directly against incumbents, especially ones that have network effect retention of communities, right? That's sort of the dynamic that we're hearing a lot about now, that most people are playing established games, not new ones, right? It's because they're black holes. People gravitate into them because that's where their friends are, and they don't want to leave their friends behind. The answer, the path out of that kind of trap is novelty. You need to offer something that people have never seen before. Mm-hmm. It needs to be a blue ocean area. It needs to be something that they can't get anywhere else. Because if you're offering something familiar, the switching cost is way too high. Why switch? I might take a look at it, but why permanently move, right?
Yeah, and those large deep pocket companies you're talking about are usually incredibly risk averse, and they will take a very long time to move the Death Star into position. And hopefully you can entrench before that happens, right?
Yeah, and when because they are conservative, the things that they tend to be conservative about are novel gameplay, right? because finding the fun is hard and it's expensive. So they tend to compete on polish, on graphics, and on content volume, right?
And user acquisition.
and user acquisition, yeah. And that's why a common time that we see bunches of innovation is actually when some new tech comes along that is really different, whether it's touch screens or flash or the internet or something, right? That is different enough that it's beneath the incumbent's notice, and the incumbent's skill sets don't work there. And so that's the chance for the scrappy little mammals to come in and do stuff, and they can do stuff cheaply. And then they establish themselves in the space. That is how we got Zynga. They were the scrappy little mammal, right? Once upon a time, that's how we got Activision, right? Like
that's why I joined them at an early stage. It felt fresh and scrappy at the time I joined. It felt bloated, massive, and world destroying by the end.
yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the cycle of life. That's how these studios work. And sometimes the big incumbent can't make the hairpin turn if that new technology or platform or affordance turns out to be the next big thing, and they go over a cliff, right? And we've seen that happen plenty of times, right? Used to be a lot more publishers back in the day, big giant console publishers than there are now, right? So
it's a great call to action for everybody who's watching this, though, for the game industry, because so last year there was 18,000, almost 19,000 games launched on Steam. The vast majority of them are variations on core genres that we've seen before, with maybe interesting stories, interesting content for sure in a lot of cases, but not a lot of innovation around core game design. So there is huge opportunities still to explore the space of fun that people can have, which I'm excited by Stars Reach, because you really are exploring a new space. Now, something that I wanted to kind of go back to a little bit is partly on the metaverse thing, but also let's talk about what is arguably the biggest metaverse we have right now, or arguably the largest game that exists, which is Minecraft. So Minecraft did exactly your advice, really, which is don't build the content, just give them the sandbox. It's almost no content. There is a little bit of content, but it's very, very small. And players have created everything on top of it. I don't know if I'd classify it as an MMO. It kind of is in a weird way, because of all the private servers and like the online community that exists around it. So many people have tried to replicate that formula, the sandbox formula, like the low content, the high creativity environment. That's kind of what every metaverse startup pitched over the last several years. Again, how do you build that into a game where you have the sandbox preserved, but you have enough of the fun factor there that people are just brought into it and they want to play compulsively in the game loop? Yeah. What did Minecraft get right that you learned from, I guess, is part of my question.
Yeah. So a couple of things there. First, the kind of simulation that's in Minecraft was actually inspired a decent amount by Wars Online, which was inspired a decent amount by the simulation stuff we did in Ultima Online. So in some ways, there's kind of a family tree going on there. Minecraft, in many ways, strongly reminds me of text mods, where text mods, there were a variety of, essentially today we'd call them engines. We called them code bases back then. There were code bases anybody could download, set up, and swap space on their local, their computer account at the university and start running a mod. And they would come with base gameplay, and people would start hacking them and modifying them and trying to make them more unique, right? So we kind of created an entire couple of generations worth of virtual world admins, right? Who started running small scale MMOs, right? For them and for their friends. And a few of them got into the hundreds or more of players. And at that point, you are talking the size of, many of the original size MMO servers, right? Like Meridian 59 was about a 250 person capacity. That's about the size MUDs could hold. So yeah, at that point, it is, at least under the original old definitions, that would be kind of that scale. We called Meridian 59 an MMO. So the big thing though, Muds had and Minecraft had, were actually distributing the server, having it be, lots of instances of them around. People as early as the 1990s, I want to say it might have been 94, 95, there was the concept of an intermud protocol that let you walk from one player's server to another. That's how long we've had actual metaverses, because that is, you could probably pinpoint that as that is actually the moment where you got a distributed metaverse actually happening, right? When we look at what's happening with Minecraft, it's like, here's all of those servers, but they're not interconnected, right? And the interconnection piece, if you go read Snow Crash or Ready Player One or any of the other zillions of fictional depictions, the interconnected piece is pretty important, right? Like that's kind of a key element of it. I don't think you can go up against the sheer volume of what users have done over the decades with Minecraft and say, well, I want to compete on the same grounds, right? Like that is exactly the same mistake as going up against a giant incumbent rich publisher. In fact, now that Microsoft has Minecraft, it is literally. But even when it was independent, right? Like the volume there is such that you can't compete against that giant entrenched thing, right? So even with Minecraft, the answer is you have to do something that is familiar enough, but is at right angles to what Minecraft is doing, because they are a giant incumbent in their space. I think we saw a lot of sort of Minecraft clones, but in these markets, any market where people retain on a service, if you don't differentiate, it's going to trend towards monopoly, is what it comes down to. Unless you sufficiently differentiate, it will trend towards monopoly. So the big lessons for me were, hey, there's now all of these communities that can run segments of a larger thing because they've been trained to do it. They've learned how to do it. They grew up doing it, right? Like the oldest Minecraft players who started when they were 8 are, right? They're in their 20s or something, right? They're grown-ups. So where's the grown-up game for them? And they have different kinds of expectations out of a grown-up game. They are going to want that level of richness and freedom, but they're also going to want more gameplay structure, a game that respects their time, content, maybe a setting that they can build on and expand rather than just something that's really vague. And then let them take it as a starting point and grow from there. So yeah, I would say those are the kinds of lessons that I took away. So, by the way, one of our internal lines is Breath of the Wild meets Minecraft in a sandbox MMO. One of the ways that we like to think about what we're building.
So a couple of related comments here. So first of all, Quick Games with a question about the 40 million. I believe the answer is across multiple rounds of funding, not today, previously announced.
Over 5 years.
Yeah. And but also kind of hand in hand with that, Dao Shen's comment here about too many games are unfinished. So we're $40 million into this game. I guess the designy kind of question is, so at this stage, I don't think you're still wrestling with, hey, what's the core game about? You're onto a different set of problems. So $40 million in, 5 years in, what kind of problems are you solving now? What problems should developers in similar situations be wrestling with at this stage?
I mean, at this stage, it's production. It's content production is the main thing that we spend effort on, which for us includes a lot of systemic content production. In particular, as a skill tree driven game where players unlock content by progressing through and buying new skills, it's okay, we need a farming system now. Let's add the farming system and all the plants and recipes and that go with it. But we need to give players the tools. So we're at the stage where we're just adding those, and we're adding them every few weeks. The other big thing that you do at this stage, of course, is continuing to push scalability, stability, robustness, right? And we're working on that. One virtue of using this very metaversy architecture of individual servers that bubble up and down in a network is that your scaling problem is very different from dealing with a server meshing, multi-server complex cluster. You basically need to optimize one server process for peak concurrency, right? And then, once you get that to a threshold, it just horizontally scales, right? Which is a much simpler problem. And so we feel pretty good about where we are in that process, right? We routinely hit 100 plus in individual zones now, and our target is higher than that. And we are, there's cost reasons to keep wanting to drive it up, social and gameplay reasons to keep wanting to drive it up. But we have lots of headroom, right? There's lots of room to keep pushing that number up. I mean, if MUDs could hit 250 in the 90s, right? We have something like 10,000 times the compute power today.
Well, thanks.
Ultima Online could run on my Apple Watch.
Easily.
That's right.
Thanks, Daoshan and Quick Games, for your questions. Here's a much earlier question from Holy. Just curious how you're thinking about this. So I remember back in the day with Star Wars Galaxies, and of course, this goes all the way back to UO and everything from players ganging up and killing Lord British to whatever the heck they were doing in the game. Raph, your games have always been platforms for character expressiveness, player creativity. How are you thinking about things like role-play and immersion in Stars Reach, or does that just happen on its own when you give people this kind of platform?
No, you've got to support it. We have professions for as many different ways to play as we can think of. So, and that makes sense to support. So professions explicitly for exploring, for gathering flowers is literally a skill tree in the game, right? For crafting, obviously, there's lots of different fantasies that come with crafting and commerce, including things like smuggling things past those sneaky robots that don't want you to transport ancient alien artifacts. We have what we think of as social professions, the dancers, the musicians, the writers, the journalists. Writers and strategy guide creators are a huge part of the ecosystem for MMOs. The map makers, the people who decode the algorithms. So we have built skill trees for them. And we're exploring things like, we're going to have an in-game newsnet. You can level up in journalism and publish content to the newsnet, including publishing your out-of-game content on the newsnet. And if you're a streamer, if you level up by getting likes for your in-game content from other players, we can give you things like drone cameras or chyrons on your screen, which then make your stream better, right? And if you think about it, that's like such an easy idea. Like, why haven't people done this? Right? It's like, and that way we can reward those out-of-game activities in the game. So it's about, the answer is fundamentally, try to provide ways in which there's an activity you want to reward. Make it so that the game can see it, which may involve adding a small game system. If the game can see it, then you can reward it. And more people will do it instead of feeling like they're second-class citizens because the game penalizes them in opportunity cost because they weren't off fighting monsters instead.
Well, we're hitting the top of the hour here, Raph. This is a conversation that could have easily gone for like one of these epic 4 or 5 hour streams, except we got to let you go back and like work on your games. So we can't do that. But so I will say this, though, like this is a really innovative game. I'm really glad to see this level of creativity in the industry. You're doing great work, Raph. I'm going to be backing this Kickstarter. We've got a studio audience here of a lot of people. Hey, if you're planning to back this Kickstarter, why don't you say so in the comments right now so we can flash it on the screen, give Raph a little sizzle reel that he can put in his Kickstarter and let people know there's already social proof. Like, get in before it's too late. Get those scarce tiers of rewards that are available there. But Raph, mostly I want to just thank you for taking the time out of your very, very busy schedule to participate in this and tell us your vision for the project and share some of your experiences. And here we go. We got people saying that they're backing you, Raph. So you should feel really, really good that you're hitting a decent conversion rate here already.
Awesome. Well, I'll also say for people who are just curious, there are live streams constantly. I think people were live streaming the game right now. There is no NDA, and you can sign up to be a tester right now and get in, because we're doing preview days twice a day. We're opening the servers. So if you want to try it before you jump into the Kickstarter, you can do that. So, you know,
you don't have to guess.
We're open about it. That's right. You don't have to guess.
Sounds like a man that believes in his product.
I definitely do. I definitely do.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Raph, for being here. Thanks, everybody, for taking your time with us and watching the live program. We're going to definitely be recirculating this lots of times. I think this is interesting to everybody, whether you're developing an MMO or any kind of game, whether you're doing a Kickstarter, whatever you're doing in game development. So thanks so much for taking the time with us. This has been really, really awesome.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was my pleasure.
Take care, everybody.
All right.